Vector 235, climb initially to 5,000 feet and over to mothership.
This man wiped out half of North Vietnam's top fighter jets in just 13 minutes. And he did it with a trick so risky it could have ended his entire career if it didn't end in flames first. What kind of military strategy was this? And how did it pull off the impossible? This risky USAF ambush decimated North Vietnam's deadly MiG-21s. Here's how. It was 1967, and the US Air Force is facing major challenges in the skies over Vietnam. The whole operation was supposed to be about overwhelming firepower, a relentless bombing campaign called Operation Rolling Thunder that began back in March 1965. The goal? To crush North Vietnam's ability to wage war by bombing its infrastructure, military targets, and supply routes to the south. But there was one problem. North Vietnam wasn't backing down. The North Vietnamese were scrappy. They used the Ho Chi Minh Trail to send supplies southward, and despite all the bombing, they kept their war machine going. And they didn't just defend, they built one of the deadliest anti-air systems of the time. Surface-to-air missiles, anti-aircraft artillery, radar installations, all of it was concentrated along the flight paths that American bombers had to use. But their biggest asset? The MiG-21, a Soviet-made interceptor that could take on American jets, especially the F-105 Thunder Chief, which was the primary aircraft for US bombing runs. Now, here's the catch. The F-105, or the Thud, as pilots called it, was powerful but heavy, especially when loaded with bombs. While it could hold its own, it wasn't a match for the lightweight, agile MiG-21s, which were just waiting to ambush these Thunder Chiefs. In hit-and-run strikes, the MiGs would dart out from behind clouds or low altitudes, take a shot, then disappear before the Americans had a chance to strike back. It was guerrilla warfare in the sky. The Americans needed a new approach, a way to outsmart their opponents and even the playing field. That's where Colonel Robin Olds came in. If you're enjoying this story so far, make sure to hit that subscribe button for more incredible stories from history. Now, Robin Olds wasn't your typical Air Force officer. A double ace with 16 kills from World War II, he was a maverick, a leader who didn't mind ruffling a few feathers if it meant getting the job done. Born into a family of military aviators, Olds had fighter pilot instincts in his blood. But it wasn't just his skills that set him apart. It was his thinking. He looked at the problems his squadron was facing, and instead of seeing defeat, he saw an opportunity for one of the boldest deceptions in military history. When Olds took command of the 8th Tactical Fighter Wing, also known as the Wolfpack, morale was low and the squadron's performance was suffering. The MiGs had a psychological edge, and Olds knew he had to shake things up. After months of flying missions and observing the MiG tactics, Olds came up with a radical plan. They wouldn't just fight the MiGs, they'd lure them into a trap. His plan was named Operation Bolo, inspired by a Filipino machete used for surprise attacks. The concept was simple yet brilliant. Trick the MiG-21s into thinking they were about to ambush a group of defenseless F-105 bombers, only to find themselves facing heavily armed F-4 Phantoms. But to pull it off, the Phantoms would have to look, sound, and act exactly like the bombers. Every detail had to be right. Olds and his team had to make their F-4 Phantoms appear as indistinguishable from the F-105s as possible. They coordinated the entire mission around the typical habits of an F-105 bombing run. First, they planned the same route, heading towards Hanoi on a familiar course that the F-105s always used. They matched the same speeds, flew in the same formations, and even used the same call signs that the bombers did. This meant that on radar, they would look exactly like the F-105 Thunder Chiefs. But the masterstroke was equipping the Phantoms with the QRC-160 jamming pods. These pods emitted a specific electronic signal used by the F-105s to protect them from surface-to-air missiles. On radar, this signal was as much a calling card as a visual ID, practically screaming F-105 to North Vietnamese radar operators. Olds' squadron hoped that when the MiG-21s picked up this signal, they would rush up from the ground, confident they'd found easy targets. And as if this setup wasn't complex enough, Olds requested the entire US Air Force, Navy, and Marine Corps to keep every other plane out of the skies over North Vietnam that day. He wanted to make sure that his aircraft would be the only contacts appearing on North Vietnamese radar that day. This was no easy ask, but the command approved it. For one day, Operation Bolo would have the entire sky to itself. On January 2, 1967, the mission began. 28 Phantoms from the 8th Tactical Fighter Wing took off from Ubon Air Base in Thailand, led by Olds himself. The flights were given call signs based on American car brands: Olds, Ford, Rambler, and more. The Phantoms flew low, quietly approaching North Vietnam in their bomber formation, following every detail of an F-105 route. When they reached North Vietnamese airspace, the MiGs took the bait. Radar operators spotted the familiar jamming signal and scrambled their elite MiG-21 interceptors. To them, it looked like just another bombing raid. They had no idea they were flying right into a trap. Olds and his team circled near Phuc Yen Air Base, maintaining their formation at 18,000 feet. Visibility was poor that day, with heavy cloud cover hanging over the area. The Phantoms waited in tense silence, hoping that the MiGs would break through the clouds at any moment. Just as they were about to question whether the plan would work, Olds spotted a MiG coming in fast. The trap was set. Olds gave the order to engage, and his squadron armed their missiles. The MiGs, realizing too late that they were up against Phantoms, suddenly found themselves in a close-range dogfight. As one MiG dived to escape, Olds and his wingman gave chase, firing their missiles. Some of the American missiles failed to launch or track in the humid, dense air, a frustrating reminder of the technical issues that had plagued them throughout the war. But when they connected, the results were devastating. One by one, the MiGs began to fall. Colonel Daniel James Jr., leading the forward flight, engaged a MiG at such close range he could see the enemy pilot's face. In a swift maneuver, James turned the tables and brought down his target. Rambler Flight, led by Captain John Stone, dove into the fray as well, scoring multiple kills as the MiGs tried desperately to escape. The fight was fast, chaotic, and lethal. Olds had given his men permission to engage as soon as they confirmed their targets, which allowed them to strike without waiting for visual confirmation. This was crucial, as it leveled the playing field against the nimble MiGs. In just 13 minutes, the Americans had downed 7 MiG-21s, nearly half of North Vietnam's MiG fleet, without losing a single Phantom. The remaining MiGs retreated, and the skies fell silent. Operation Bolo was an overwhelming success. The North Vietnamese had been caught off guard and suffered massive losses. When the Phantoms returned to base, they were greeted with cheers, as the pilots signaled their kills with raised fingers. For the first time in months, the USAF had achieved a decisive victory in the air war over Vietnam. This mission didn't just cripple North Vietnam's air force for a few days. The psychological blow was even greater. The North Vietnamese grounded their MiG-21s for months, forced to rethink their entire air strategy. When they did return, they were far more cautious, wary of being drawn into another American ambush. Colonel Robin Olds became a legend. Not only had he pulled off one of the most daring missions of the war, but he also made it clear that the old-school dogfighting skills still had a place in the jet age. For the rest of his career, Olds advocated for better training in air combat, emphasizing the importance of both new technology and traditional tactics. His leadership and strategic brilliance in Operation Bolo set the standard for American air combat and shaped USAF tactics for decades. Operation Bolo remains one of the most successful air combat missions in U.S. military history, a masterstroke of strategy, leadership, and pure courage. Colonel Robin Olds and his team didn't just shoot down MiGs, they set an example of how to overcome impossible odds with ingenuity and skill. So, what part of Operation Bolo impressed you the most? Let us know in the comments below. And while you're here, check out our video on other unbelievable military tactics in history.